it amounted to 2.5 million extra people into our country in 1 year.
Yeah.
Which is almost 10%.
Of the whole population.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so I don't know. I thought we could talk about how there's a lot of news right now about Canada's broken immigration system, and some reports that there's over 1 million more non-permanent residents living in Canada than were originally reported.
So what's funny is I saw a news article the other day. I can't remember where I saw it, but they were calculating how many people have come in over the last year or 12 months, and they were adding up all of the things, and 1 million extra was actually
on top of the million.
On top of the million, but then other little 100,000 here for this, 100,000 here for this, like temporary workers for this. It amounted to 2.5 million extra people into our country in 1 year.
Yeah.
Which is almost 10%.
Of the whole population.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, probably about like a 7%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely wild.
Yeah.
And it's starting
in
to
one
be,
fucking year.
Yeah. So what's interesting is the system is broken. I'm going to read this quote from the former housing minister. Sorry. No, the former immigration minister, Sean Fraser, who they've now pivoted to the housing minister because he did such a great job with immigration. So they say Canada's housing minister, Sean Fraser, says the massive increase in international students, this is just students, by the way, not all the other stuff, over the past decade has had a pronounced impact on the housing market, you don't say. Asked if Canada should cap its international student visas, he says, quote, I think it's one of the options we ought to consider, end quote. You think?
Yeah.
Like, you just realize now that we might want to have a cap on international student visas, right? So I think what happened is some of these institutions caught on that there's no cap to immigration for students, and they just started pumping them in as profit mills, right? And there's been a lot of talk lately as if you say anything against immigration, you can be labeled as racist,
bigot,
culturalist, Zionist, whatever. I don't know, all the different terms. So what people are starting to say now is it's exploitation. You're exploiting immigrants from other countries to profit off of them.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of like fake institutions have been set up to bring in international students. They're not actually coming here to get an education. They're actually just coming here to get a visa.
Do they know?
Yes. Yeah.
The students know that it's not a real institution?
Yeah, some. It's like a black market for students, right?
Gotcha.
Some people, like most of the students, in my opinion, are coming here
thinking they're getting an education.
No.
Oh, they're not.
It's the opposite. Well, they are, but they don't care about the education. They just want to get here. That's the easiest, quickest, least friction way to do it.
I got it.
Because you're allowed to like work here on a student visa. And then once you're here, you're just applying for immigration status, whatever, right? It becomes a lot easier.
Got it.
So it's become, exploitational. And we've been talking about this for 2 years, but it seems like the mainstream has been catching on that the immigration system here is absolutely broken. And it's taxing all of our systems, from the education system to the healthcare system and specifically housing. So what's interesting is Sean Fraser doesn't say, yes, we should immediately put a cap on international student. He says it's something we ought to consider. And that tells you what the thoughts are on immigration. I also believe, and I want your opinion on this, that the government is using it as an exploitational tool as well, because they're importing votes.
Yeah, that's obviously.
It's quite clear
obvious
that one party is very pro-immigration and the other party is labeled as anti-immigration because they're about controlled immigration. Right? I think both parties understand that immigration is valuable and important. One party is going to come here and say, "Yeah, we're going to bring in immigrants, but we need to do it intelligently."
Yeah.
And the other party has opened the floodgates. So if I'm in Canada, I just got my PR status, and I can sponsor my whole family.
Yeah.
And I just heard that there's a difference in the U.S. and Canada. If you're a permanent resident here, you have the right to sponsor your family. In the U.S., you have the privilege of possibly sponsoring your family. Like we'll examine the file and see. But here it's a right.
Yeah.
You can bring in your immediate family members. So it becomes a mill. And if you want to get out of what may be considered a third world or poor country with poor monetary policies and governance, you just get to Canada, sponsor me. I get to Canada, get my residency. I sponsor my family. and it just becomes a nonstop mill.
Yeah.
So there's permanent residence immigration, there's sponsorship, there's students, there's temporary workers, and the floodgates have been opened. And you can see the result here, specifically on housing. It's pretty crazy. And people think, well, they're just living in student rentals. Well, not necessarily.
No.
I've got these immigrants, whether they're students, workers, whatever, calling me for my properties anywhere in the city.
For sure. Same.
Yeah.
I have same.
It doesn't matter if you East End, West End, South Windsor. They're here on some sort of status.
They'll commute.
Yeah.
Like
It's
they'll
not
take,
even that.
they'll take the bus,
yeah,
or
it's not
they'll
that-
commute. A lot of them carpool. A lot of them have, someone around. I employ a lot of students, and my facilities are in the East End of the city, where there's no educational facilities around, and they'll carpool.
Yeah.
They have cars. Like, some of these students have cars.
If they're even going to school.
Whatever.
So
yeah.
let's look at some, like, if you had to say, okay, there's 5,000 international students in Windsor right now, hypothetically. I have no idea what it is. Let's say there's 4 people per house. That means they're absorbing 1,500 rentals. Like, you don't think that's going to have a significant impact? Why do you think rents have jumped 50% in 3 years? Maybe more? That's a big reason why, on top of the lack of supply that we already have and all this. So it's having a big impact.
And it's such an unknown where people, I think, are behind the curve on this.
The general population,
They don't even see
the
it.
media,
Yeah.
they're what's interesting though, I'm actually, for the first time, we've been talking about this for 2 or 3 years. Go back on our podcast. We've been talking about immigration, out of control, taxing the housing market, pushing rents higher, pushing prices higher. Now the mainstream average Canadian is starting to catch wind of this. I'll be out with clients and they're saying, look, I'm thinking about buying a second home as a rental so that my kid, when they're 25, I can give it to them because they're not going to be able to afford a home.
So crazy, eh?
Because I've been hearing they're bringing in too many immigrants. They brought in 1 million immigrants last year. This is so the average middle class person is starting to grumble about this, and that's the only time I think that the government changes, because you have people complaining on the margin, right? You have wealthy people complaining about things. You have poor people complaining about things. Those don't matter. It's 2 to 5% of the vote on either margin. It's really the middle class that they cater to, no matter what the side is. So now that the middle class is starting to complain, I'm anxious to see what ends up happening.